Hello, everyone, and welcome. I see everyone is logging in. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to take a couple of minutes to let everyone sign on. If you're able to type in the chat, we would love to hear from you. So we will officially start in just a minute here, but I see more and more attendees coming in. Please let us know where you're dialing in from, city, state. If you're out of the country, let us know if you're out of the country. Also, if you have any particular questions for today, we have made notes of some of the questions we received, but please feel free to drop those in the chat as well. We want to make sure this time is utilized and it's all about you and how we can serve you and show up for you. So we don't want to just talk at you. We want to have a great conversation and make sure that we can address what it is that you need to get the most out of this conversation. And today we're talking about the real stuff, okay? The good, the bad, the ugly, the ins and outs of things that people don't always talk about. And that's not in a negative way. It's just we want to get real with you guys so you can understand. Maybe there's some topics that you're not talking about with your friends right now that you want to talk about with us and you want to get real candid about them. And that's what we're here for today. So, again, just try to let everyone have a few moments to sign on, maybe just like one more minute here before we start officially. And I promise I'll do my intro and we'll begin shortly. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's conversation. Hey, okay. So I want to, we're going to go ahead and begin with intros, and then I'm going to pass the mic to you shortly. So I'm just going to introduce myself quickly, and then I'm going to pass the mic over here to Dr. Saida. So, um, For those of you who don't know, my name is Christina Lumpkin. I'm a wife, a mother of three. My oldest is almost 7. I also have my daughter is almost 7. I also have a 5-year-old son and a 2-year-old son. So I have been pregnant or postpartum for 5 years consecutively up until recently. So this topic is definitely near and dear to my heart. It's something that I'm not only passionate about, but I have lived through it. I've survived through it. There's a lot of highs and lows that come with motherhood and pregnancy and postpartum for sure. I'm also a college educator. I spent almost 5 years at Spelman College before the pandemic. I'm also a business owner. My business is called Journey to Motherhood Fitness, and that's where I do holistic coaching and I curate programs such as core rehab programs for postpartum moms like yourselves who are just trying to take care of themselves and do things that are sustainable for their lifestyle. So I don't believe in snapback culture. I don't believe in starving yourselves. I don't believe in cinching and waist training. I love food. I love real food. I would never give it up ever in life. And anyone who knows me will tell you I eat. I eat well. I've always been an advocate for, fueling your body, moving in a way that feels good and doing things that really work for you. It's all about what works for you. So my focus when I'm putting on my coaching hat is to make sure I'm encouraging and teaching other moms how to take control and take charge of their own health in a way that makes sense and is long term. So like I said, I'm excited today to talk about the ins and outs of, what really goes on during postpartum, because I think a lot of us see the Instagram photos and or we hear, good advice or bad advice here and there. But when it comes to postpartum, this is your experience and you have the opportunity to change things and do things in a way that you want to do them. So I'm excited to dive in, and I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic with our other guest for today, so she can introduce herself.
Hi, good evening. My name is Saida Pepper Wilson. I, by background, am a licensed clinical psychologist, but I've also practiced as a doula for the same number of years, pretty much, as I've been a psychologist. I am a mother of 2. I have 2 daughters. One is 15 and the other is 12. I had one of them in a hospital and one of them in a home birth, both of them with midwives, one hospital midwives, one out of hospital midwife. So I have a bit of like perspective in that experience, like what I was thinking about as I was preparing for a hospital birth, the kind of experiences that I had, and then also what that is like in a journey out of hospital. And of course, as a doula, I'm also a community doula. Coordinator and mentor. I'm meeting and connecting with hundreds of doulas all the time and sharing stories and supporting them and working with the community. And so I am always listening for just what are people needing? What is it that there's a gap in information? This topic, I thought it was so exciting because as a doula coordinator, the doulas are out there and I'm in California. And we have a lot of community doula pilots and a lot of efforts to have doulas out there. But we're often serving community, particularly in a Black community, that has never worked with a doula and doesn't necessarily have that background. And so we're really just engaging with people that are like in their first births, like, I don't know, tell me what I need to know. And it's always interesting to hear how unprepared, how over-prepared people are for just a particular part of the journey of motherhood and not for the entire experience, and how many ways there are to support that people don't realize are available. And so really looking forward to hearing your questions and thinking about what you are thinking about and supporting. I mean, you got 2 of us here, that have lived our experiences, but also we're supporting people every day that are pregnant or postpartum. And so use us as much as you can in this time. Just for, I think, a little context, I run a nonprofit in California that does a lot of diversity training and focuses on making sure that the providers that are serving the perinatal population have competency. So cultural competency, good communication skills, trauma informed, all of that. And then I do a lot of work supporting policy around maternal health with Black Mamas Matter Alliance, which is how we get to Black Maternal Health Week and all of those things. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you for that wonderful intro. And I want to make sure I point this out because she put it in the chat. Thank you, Marie. But just to reiterate what Dr. Saida shared as well, we are here to serve you. We're here to answer questions. This is the time to literally pick our brains, ask away anything that you maybe have been wanting to ask, what you weren't sure about, something you don't want to put on the internet that you're uncomfortable talking about. Now is the time. It's judgment free. This is a private conversation for us to talk. Also, You mentioned something that I want to share, and I want to kind of start the conversation there because when you said you're a doula, a lot of moms still don't know what that is and what that means. So I feel like even though it seems kind of to backtrack, I think we should. And also, I just want to share. I'm someone who, with my first two, I had three hospital births, VBAC. I mean, C-section, VBAC, VBAC. So I've experienced both. I've experienced both in and outs. Never had a home birth, all three in the hospital. But I had a doula from my third, not the first two, but my third. Um, and when I told you I needed a doula, I was like, how did I even, first of all, I was like, how did I make it this far in life? All I could think was like, why? How and why? I couldn't tell you how I had my first two. The grace of God, okay, you know, I'm a prayer warrior. Apparently that was it. Because when I had my third, I was like, no, I need help, I need support. And to put this in context, a lot of moms may relate to this as well who have younger children. My third, like I said, is two. So I got pregnant during the height of the pandemic in 2020. I was pregnant for 10 months, y'all. For 10 months, that child was in my womb, okay? All of 2020, he was born in January 2021. But the point I was making is that it was a very scary time, you know, with COVID, of course. I was in the hospital. You have all the stats going on about Black maternal health. Where I delivered was actually at Emory Hospital here in Atlanta, Georgia, which y'all probably seen a little TikTok floating around about the little icks and all kind of stuff. That was here in Emory. Okay. So even though it's a nice hospital, I definitely had some intense experiences. I had to fight for a VBAC. Like I had to tell my doctor, boom, boom, boom. And the point I'm making is I would not have done those things or probably had that VBAC without my doula. And so I don't think people understand though what a doula does, why they're important, what the benefits are. A lot of us, I think, confuse doula and midwife, which I want you to kind of break that down. So your doula, your midwife, and your OBGYN are three different individuals. And it's important that you pick a team that you're comfortable with. So whether it's your provider team or your support team, understand that doulas, midwives, and OBGYNs are not the same. And having a doula, and I just want to reiterate, I don't believe that doulas are the solution to everything happening. Stop doing that. Let's
I
not put
know.
pressure on doulas to save the world.
We're trying, but yeah. No.
Yeah, let's not end disparities with one set of people, right?
Mhm.
But anyway, if you could please start there, you know, and open the floor and talk about, you know, what do doulas do? And talk a little about doulas versus midwives versus OBGYNs. And
Okay.
again, those of you in the chat, please drop your questions. I'm going to keep checking the chat while we're talking so I can answer them if you have them. So
Absolutely.
pass the mic.
So I'll start with the scenario story because I feel like, this is like the psychologist and educator in me, that it's easier to think of something when you have a scenario, and then I'll like give a definition. So let's imagine that you have a doula, a midwife, and an OB all at the same time, because you could be working with all the. So a lot of people think it's like an exclusive experience. Oh, I have a doula. They're like, yeah, but I want an epidural. I don't know about that doula thing. And I'm like, doula support people.
That's me.
Yeah.
That was me. The epidurals.
However, you're birthing, a doula would support, right?
Right.
Would support, I've heard of a doula supporting parents that are having a surrogate, but they want to be prepared and be in the experience, right? So there's a lot of different types of doulas, but let's just say you're in a birth experience. Let's say you're at the hospital. Your classic OB is going to potentially arrive and talk to you and engage with you at some point before you're pushing, but maybe just once, right? Like on average, I mean, depending on how they're staffing and if you have an OB, they are not, unless they're like the OG OBs that are like, whenever you go into labor, I'm gonna be there. It doesn't matter if I'm off. It doesn't matter if I'm on vacation. They have a schedule. If they are not on call, somebody else will deliver you, right? You'll be at the hospital and some other OB will be there. And so the OBs are available on somewhat in their own schedule. Although, and I'm saying there's a caveat because I'm sure there's OBs out there like, I don't practice like that. I'm very person-centered. And we do have that. We have group prenatal care with OBs. So there's a lot of variety. But in like a classic scenario, your visits with your OB are maybe 15 minutes, right? Like maybe 20 if you have a lot of time, but that you're not expecting to spend an hour with your OB. You're not expecting your OB to ever come to your house and do a visit. So then we're going to move to midwife. So midwives, there are hospital-based midwives, there are out-of-hospital midwives. There are some that work in both, but in most states, there's legality and policies around types of midwives that get to work in certain places, and typically the ones that work out of hospital exclusively work out of hospital in home births and birth centers. And then you'll have hospital-based midwives that are usually CNMs, they're nurse midwives. And so if you have a midwife in general, any kind, the practice and the scope of midwifery care is whole person. So it's meant to be not just, I'm assessing your reproductive organ, and you could just sit there and lay back while I do that, right? Like imagining you go to your, doctor and they're like, all right, lay back, let's see how it's going. Let me do it, right? It's very much about like what's going on in your uterus and what's going on in your yoni. Where with a midwife, a lot of times, and I'm talking about like you're in your prenatals and postpartums, that kind of thing. A midwife is going to be asking you about your mental health, but not just like, how's it going? But they're going to actually talk to you about that. Okay, now what's going on with the partner? Well, how come the partner didn't come today? Oh, well, what's going on with the children? Okay, so you got 2 children at home. Have you thought about, like, there's a lot of time, just time allows for more person-centered, family-centered, cultural-centered experiences. Out of hospital midwives can often and usually do come to your home. Sometimes people will go to a clinic, a birth center, or a place where the midwives are working, but typically they come to your home and they're doing your prenatals in the comfort of your own environment. So there's a very different feeling around your autonomy, around your ability to speak up for yourself and to just communicate what's happening, things you don't have to communicate when somebody walks in your house and they see you got a lot going on, you got a lot of people here. It's different than at the doctor. They're like, well, how's your home environment? Most people are gonna be like, it's fine. I mean, I got a lot going on, but what are you going to do? Are they going to ask you more questions about that? Are they really going to know that a lot going on is that your uncle's living in the back? You got cousins that are in town, you got teenagers that are moving in, doing their thing, and your little ones, right? They're not going to have a context in the same way if they're not in your environment. And so there's a lot of indirect whole support in home-based midwifery care. And we see this a lot in other countries at mainstream midwives, that they do a lot of home visits. And then you have a doula, right? So the doula is a person that's oftentimes going to prepare you for pregnancy. They're going to give you like sort of childbirth education. Maybe they're not trained as a childbirth educator formally, but they are going to have a lot of training around that so that they're preparing you. But you may also do childbirth education classes separately. But they're going to do preparation with you around like your childbirth experience, help you do your birth planning, talk to you about what's going on. And really, it's like, this is a person that whatever's happening when you feel confused, it's after the doctor's appointment, 2 hours later, you're like, you know what? I don't really understand what they were talking about. Can you call your doctor back? Probably not. You could usually call your midwife back, but you can definitely call your doula. You call your doula. Now, doulas have their own boundaries, but on the weekend, you can text them. There's a lot more of an informal relationship there. And they're just like your pregnancy and birthing bestie. If you're in the moment of childbirth, so let's like skip to the end. If a doula is there, most likely they are, depending on what positioning you're in, but maybe in your ear while you're pushing, coaching you, giving you calm ideas, telling you this, you're amazing, we're almost here. Oh, I know, just keep breathing. Okay, you're going to take a nice deep breath. You're gonna, like, they're really coaching you and supporting you. The midwife or the OB are typically going to be looking for the baby's head, right? They're going to be down in your yoni, actually assessing the medical scenario that's happening. Midwives and OBs are monitoring you in a medical way. They're trained. Midwives are trained, clinicians. It's a part of a medical, model as well as a whole person model. And so your midwife, you could have a midwife and never have an OB, but you wouldn't have a doula and not have a midwife and an OB. You need a primary care provider, and the doula is there for emotional and physical support for you in addition to that, but not in replace. But a midwife can absolutely replace an OB unless you're high risk and you actually need support. And if you have a C-section, as you talked about, then an OB is your person, right? So we need everybody on the team because the OBs are our surgeons, and they're really skilled, as particularly around high risk pregnancies, where the midwives are extreme specialists in low risk normative birth, which is actually really important because you think, oh, I like a high risk person to be over my birth. But actually a high risk person is always thinking about the risks, right? Often, where a person that is trained to work with the average population has a lot of skills in giving you a natural birth experience, whatever that looks like for you, if that's what you're choosing, especially in the out of hospital. And so that is, a long, short version of the differences.
The short Costco sample that feels like an entree size version. No, but that was a good breakdown. That, again, I don't think everyone really understands that. I love what you said too about someone just said excellent breakdown. And Malcolm, I see your question. Thank you. That's a wonderful question. I promise I'm going to present that in a second. When you said doula as a coach, I think that's a really good way to kind of kind of separated as well. Like your doula is the coach, the person right next to you. Like you said, your midwife is the person, as we say in our culture, catching the baby. They're actually down there. And then the OB is also there to catch the baby. But again, they're there also medically monitoring things. I was not high risk in my pregnancies, but in being a VBAC candidate, there's more precautions. That's part of why I also decided on a hospital birth as well. But what you said about the doula as a coach too, I just want to, maybe you can share this as well. I don't go on a tangent, but I want to share this too. There are different kinds of doulas, and I think people assume that there's just like there's doula, but there's different kinds. In full transparency, for me, part of having a doula was definitely the advocacy portion, because like you said, I kid you not, I would not have known what questions to ask. I didn't know I could turn down the glucose test. But when I found out, I said, throw it in the trash. I'm not doing it. I don't want to drink that stuff, right? So like once I knew, I was like, oh, I can say no. When I learned what I could say no to and ask requests, that was empowering. For me also though, with my third, my child that I had was also after loss. So there's different kinds of doulas, unfortunately. Like if you're someone who is dealing with loss, grief, bereavement, that's what the emotional support can be for as well. I don't think enough moms know that. I don't think moms understand that, whether it's, in my case, I didn't have an issue with fertility, but if you're struggling with infertility, if you're like me, I had a rainbow baby, which is really exciting, but it also was terrifying. Like I just had a miscarriage and now there's a baby in my womb, a pandemic, there's a Cheeto in the orange in the office right now. It's a lot going on in the world. Like, I don't know, it was too much. I was like, I need support. I really need to make sure I'm doing this right. So if you don't mind also just maybe talking a little bit about the different layers that come with the birth world, because I don't think enough moms understand that that's the short version, but there's different layers of support for different seasons that you're in as well.
Absolutely. So, all right, so let's go, there are doulas that specialize in certain age group populations. There are doulas that work particularly with teens and young mothers. There are doulas that work a lot with older mothers as well. And so you have, what are the courses of your reproductive life? You could have a baby and you have a doula that's working with you in pregnancy, childbirth. Then you have the baby. There are like birth doulas who really focus on the pregnancy and the birth, may not do extensive amounts of postpartum visits with you because their services are for the birth. But you may feel like you still need support. You want somebody to come and visit. You want more extensive at-home support. You have postpartum doulas that are trained and specialize in that. And there are some doulas that only postpartum. There are some doulas that are full spectrum. So they prenatal, labor and delivery, and postpartum. Full spectrum, that term is used loosely in a lot of different ways. That often refers to also doulas that support around abortion. And so there are abortion doulas. There are doulas that specialize in certain aspects of the maternal health world. So perinatal loss is a big one that a lot of times what brings doulas to that work is either they had a perinatal loss themselves. And so when they became a doula, they were always thinking about mothers and people who had experiences like them, or people, doulas that had their first perinatal loss as a doula, had no training in it, because most classic trainings for doulas don't necessarily include a lot of extensive preparation for how to support in a perinatal loss. And then once they have that experience, which by the nature of a person that has a lot of learned skills in helping and supporting, there are a lot of things like in life that you may not have been prepared for on book, but you could show up for someone, right? So even doulas that are not trained as perinatal loss doulas, they're very helpful to have when you have a perinatal loss. And I work with a lot of doulas who it's their first time, and we support and mentor them through that. But then there are trainings specifically for perinatal loss. I'll just do a shout out to Erica McAfee with Sisters in Loss. It's a podcast, really focuses on Black women's perinatal loss and support. And she actually created specific training for doulas because out of her offering, she wanted to really have these lived experiences through the podcast and her stories that she's heard from so many hundreds and hundreds of women and people who have birthed that have had experiences in loss. So I'm trying to think, is there another, we've been talking a lot about death doulas. And so that is different than perinatal loss doula. A lot of us who are doulas, birth doulas of some kind, have also found ourselves supporting our family members when they've been in transition. And it's because there's a very similar skill to being up late at night with someone and caring for a person that can't really describe to you what they need, but you need to be able to intuit that they have pain or that they are thirsty, or, so there's a lot of just the natural skills. I think of being a doula a lot more as as a calling and like a ministry than just a profession. So somebody said to me today, I was at another a meeting, and they were like, well, how much schooling do I have to be the doula? And I was like, do you have a calling to be up at night for 18 hours with people who are in the birth experience? Do you feel moved when you see people like who are pregnant and postpartum, and you just think, I want to go to her house for 2 weeks and just be with her and make sure she is resting and eating, right? Like, if that's not what moves you, it's not that kind of thing where you go and you're going to come back, when the shift changes. Most of us doulas is there until you're going home. We're making sure everything is patched up. So that's, a little bit of that.
Yes, thank you for that. And there's so many good questions. I'm glad you guys are commenting. I'm going to share them in a second. But yeah, I don't think there's enough information. So thank you, because people tend to think about, again, they mix up doulas, midwives as one person. I'm like, they're not the same. And then also, I think people forget like how much you all do. Unfortunately, I had to do virtual because of COVID. But like you said, doulas, they check in on you. They check in on your family and your house. So there's a lot that comes with it. And I do agree. It's definitely more than just, it's not just that 15-minute appointment you talked about with your OBGYN. It is a calling. Another great question here. So we're getting questions about men and how they can be involved. So with maternal child health. So men, dads, partners, family members. My husband was definitely involved with all of my births. So not just the positioning though. So obviously you can talk about the positioning and all that. Yeah. But what is it that men can be doing to support women? I think the other thing too, and I have to remind myself of this, I said this before, Black maternal health is not a Black woman's issue, in the sense that, yes, we're advocating for ourselves, but just so we're clear, that doesn't mean the weight of it should be on us. And there should, also we know, like, aftershock, different documentaries coming out, when things happen to Black women, it's happening to everyone. And we tend to be like, oh, Black women talk about this. It's not just us talking. We need fathers, we need our partners, we need our husbands, we need our, our relatives, whatever scenario is. So someone just asked, what would you tell men who want to be involved in this movement, who want to advocate, who want to stand beside us, with us, for us? How would you tell them to get involved?
I think this is the theme of the day. I was just at an event on Black maternal health data earlier today, and a gentleman came to talk to me at the very end and said that he really is wanting to create a coalition of fathers and men that are interested in supporting this work. So
please do it. Like, yes. Whoever you are, do it. Do it.
Yes. Okay, sorry. So I mean, how, I always think, how can anyone help anything? Like, what's your closest proximity, right? So it could be that you have daughters and nieces or a partner, and you're like, okay, I want to know how I can support them directly. Because I feel like when you have a personal experience, it just gives you so much more information than just studying things. Although studying can be helpful, it's that lived experience that really changes the game. And it gives you a lot of personal passion to like stay in the work. So if you have people around you, think about just assessing what kind of supports they have, what kind of supports they could need. If you have like a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old, maybe start thinking about, well, what do they know and how could I prepare them for a really optimal childbirth experience? So that would mean I might need to connect them to some local midwives who do education, or some, so getting, like, seeing what's in close proximity to the people who you could support. I say that's the first thing, because when we have strong men and partners in the community, it changes the game for so many of the disparities that we look at, because you need that advocacy when you're pregnant and exhausted. You need the advocacy when you're in labor and you're trying to just manage contractions every couple minutes. You don't necessarily have time to, once you've asked a couple times, hi, I'm feeling uncomfortable, can somebody come and just take a look? After you say that about 3 times and another 15 contractions comes in, you're just like, I don't even remember. I'm just tired and something hurts. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, you get a little hazy, and everybody who's been in that experience knows what I'm saying. There's a point where words will mean little now, and you just need somebody to be paying attention. So your partner, if you're queued up to, what are things that, so some things you could do, look at the data that has come out around why people have maternal mortality, like what causes death in childbirth, and in the postpartum period, what causes morbidities, and then think about, what do you need to know, or what do you need to ask providers if you're working with someone, like with your partner, so that you can understand where they're at on their baseline. So I always say, like, for people, I like to tell providers a lot of stats. I don't like families looking at statistics too much because I don't want them to get anxious. But what's helpful is when you know facts, then you can understand how to advocate for yourself. So if they say, oh, your blood pressure's come back a little high, but they don't mention to you like that the leading cause related to maternal health is related to blood pressure and a lot of cardiovascular issues, then you may not be queued up to say, okay, well, because sometimes they're just like, yeah, so, we'll just check it again the next time. You might be like, no, I'm sorry. The next time is 2 months from now. What should we do between now and 2 months to make sure that she doesn't have high blood pressure? Then you get into like a solution-based conversation, which is like minimize stress. That's basically the answer for so many things. And I would say too, just finding ways to just provide like practical supports, food. I mean, obviously finances are helpful, but like getting a food train together with the family and church folks and people at the mosque or whoever is connected so that there's food for the first 40 days and they don't have to cook. That is such a big deal. And it's like a traditional practice that we've lost in our community, that we nurture the person who's birthed. But without that, the only person there is the partner. And usually, especially in didactic where you have a male and a female, a lot of times the males are used to the female cooking. So now it's like she's not doing what she used to do. And then it creates a relationship issue versus you should just be prepared that for 40 days, she should do nothing but figure out how to nurse or, feed and care for this baby. If that's the dynamic of what's happening. And so just, and there's so many things, but that's where I think we can start.
As you were talking in my head, I was like, there's so much that I could say right now. I'm trying to keep it in. There's just so much. That was a really great question. So thank you, Malcolm. And again, please, everyone who's on there, drop your questions in the chat. I am looking at them. Ask away, comment below if you want to hear more of something, et cetera, et cetera. Great question. And I think that's a great segue into another topic about those societal expectations and norms. And also I think, of course, culture. So like when you were talking about the cooking, that was a trigger for me because, it's one of those dynamics where it's like, matter of fact, not even just cooking, but I think especially for women and Black women in particular, of course, we have the whole strong woman stigma we're trying to undo while also being strong. It is kind of a catch-22 in that. It's like everyone's talking about the soft life, but like, I mean, we can't always be soft. Like sometimes we got to actually, speak up and speak out, right? But I think it's important to note what you were saying about men or male partners, relatives, etc. When you're supporting women, what I would say just from like a personal perspective, something I've shared with my husband and other men is like, you have to stop applying what you learn from other women to your wife, your partner, your spouse, that individual. If a man says something like, oh, well, my mom used to do I'm not your mom. She worked 3 jobs with no help and she did it. Okay. I'm not her. I have no desire to be her. We're trying to live the soft life in 2023. So like, we don't want to do that. So it doesn't mean that I'm less of a woman, or like you said, I like cooking because I like to eat. So I'm going to cook, I'm going to eat, but like, for example, am I going to make a gourmet meal every single day? No. Some days it'll be Instacart. Some days it'll be takeout. Some days it'll be the air fryer, which is pretty much almost all the time now. But the point is,
I know that air fryer is a game changer.
If it doesn't go in the air fryer, it's probably not going to happen. I'll be honest with you. If it's in the air fryer, no, then we got to figure something else. Maybe the oven, but really the air fryer. So a lot of us are trying to juggle all these things. And so anyway, for the men who are watching and listening and dialing in, several men have, chimed in and they're trying to understand things. Some things may not make sense from your perspective because you're a man and not a woman, but also encouraging the men, the things that you've seen modeled by your mom and other women, that may or may not work for the women that you're serving. So I'm not saying you shouldn't acknowledge those experiences, but a lot of us are using these outdated templates as a frame of reference, and it's dangerous. Like, I'm grateful that I have a supportive partner. So as I've been navigating motherhood, first kid, second kid, third kid, as I got real about what I could and couldn't handle, I needed help with and spoke out, he's evolved and been very supportive. But there was a time where just me, because I saw my mom doing this, my grandmother doing this, I see Black women doing this, they're every woman, it's all in me. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I'm not shocked that I'm not Whitney. I'm tired. I don't want to sing, dance, cook, and I don't want to do all that. And then you wonder why I'm having a mental health crisis, right? So I think for men, some of what you've seen, it just may not apply, or a lot of times you've only seen one piece of the puzzle. Like kind of like right now we're talking about the term now is implicit bias, which I'm like, it's racism, but whatever, we're gonna call it implicit bias, right? So in the hospital setting, it is kind of invisible. Like you wouldn't know what it looks like until you see it. So men, for example, when you're in the room with someone, if that provider's making a snide remark, or and you notice that your partner is uncomfortable, or like you just said, because it happened to me, and I was like, I'm about to fight somebody. If the person you're supporting keeps asking for the same thing multiple times, step in and help. You see what I'm saying? Like, by the time I'm in labor with contractions, I have Pitocin with my third. I thought I was going to die. There's labor, contractions, Pitocin. I literally am about to push a child out. I've asked for an epidural 3 times. Now I'm requiring it of you. Okay. But there's some things that I just got so tired of asking for that I just like, at this point, I have to get my child out and survive. You see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of things that they really are somewhat invisible, I feel like, to the average eye, but men could definitely step in. And I'm not saying that you're not doing enough, because you are. And unfortunately, there are men who are in these rooms pleading and doctors are still not listening. So I'm not saying they're not involved. That's a whole different story. So let's not talk about that. We should focus on joy, not trauma. But the point is, you all can stand with us and be a part of that advocacy. In the same way that doulas are coaches, I feel like men are in the same lane. And even with my own children, with my doula, when she walked me through stuff, my husband was right there on the call. Come on, look, we having a baby, then we
Yeah,
got to
and that's
talk
the
to the
thing I was gonna
doula.
say, because somebody said that about, can doulas,
Yeah,
what are your thoughts about doulas to support the paternal figures? So,
they should be
I
a part
mean,
of it.
if you've experienced a doula that doesn't engage with a paternal figure or the partner, I'd be surprised, because the doula knows
Yeah,
when we get in that room, it's the people in the room that you're
it's
supporting, right? And the partner, if they're going to be
yeah,
there, you're probably wanting them in prenatals with you and really supporting. And I think that what I have noticed, and it's something that like is my secret favorite part, other than supporting in the childbirth experience, is watching the blooming pride of this partner as they're
yes,
like feeling really confident about how to support the person, because they don't know. I mean, there's like, that's not a
I don't
messaging that
know.
typically goes to males about how to support in childbirth. Like that, the
Yeah,
generations before, men weren't even involved in that. And so I
right,
think that having a doula is like a secret game changer for the males and for partners, because now you have somebody who's a professional who could tell you, this is how you support them. And at night, this is how
right,
you can support. And in the morning, this is how you can support. And when this situation, and like in the intimacy of your life, right? And so as a
mm-hmm.
doula, I mean, I have supported people around their sexual and intimate lives during pregnancy in ways that I know they didn't talk to their doctor about. I know because they said, well, we didn't want to talk to the doctor, but we have more questions, right? So it's like, you
Right,
could have talked to the doctor. You could have talked to, but if you only spend 15 minutes a visit, you don't really get, you
right,
don't feel like you can now, after the most important thing about what was going on was done,
yeah,
to say, okay, we have a question, right? But those kind
right,
of things really are really important, I think. So yes, doulas absolutely support with partners. And I'm telling you, most people, most of the dads that I know, when they had a doula, I feel like I get more love from the dads. I get more text
mm,
messages, but I mean, like I get a lot of ongoing, like, you saved my life, and it's just because they
mm,
felt like they didn't have to have the pressure of knowing everything to do, but they were like you see those old movies where I hate you and they're yelling at the partner, right? Because maybe the partner has
right,
no idea how to be supported, but the doula, might suggest, okay, it's time to come over here and just
right,
rub her back, right? Okay, nope, you might need to stop rubbing her back. She needs to get up, and
yeah,
just really is just such a supportive space for the partners.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I'm checking the questions. Feel free to keep dropping them. I think that's a great segue, though, into we talked about support in this case more so like in the birthing process, but in general, I think it's important to talk about, again, Black maternal health is not just for Black women and affecting us. So I think we should also talk a little bit more about, some of these changing cultural expectations and norms and what that looks like. And I think also just everyone who's on the call, encouraging you all to figure out what it is that works for you, I think, and how you define that. So whether it's early postpartum, like I said, my kids are between 2 and 7. You mentioned having kids, middle school, high school age. Those things change, those seasons change, right? So what are okay, I guess this is a complicated question. Okay. On one hand, some of us are we talk a lot about like, our inner child and unlearning things and these different changes we're going through, right? But like, what is the life that you want? What are the things that you want? And what's the balance between that and what you're doing right now? So when you mentioned earlier, like inventory, I talked about that in the last panel I did as well about self-care. Right now, if you feel like you're struggling in motherhood, you don't feel balanced, you don't feel supported. Like in this case, for example, like you said, a lot of us feel like postpartum and motherhood in general, the baby's here. Okay, now it's on us. But that's not true. When they say it takes a village to raise a child, they mean a whole village and not just one person or just going to daycare. And even that, a lot of moms now are opting to homeschool, which is great, right? So but if you're a homeschooling mom, do you have breaks? If you want your kids to go to school, school alone is not a village either, right? So a lot of us too, I think in this time in 2023, we don't necessarily have our families. We don't have like a literal village around us, right? But it doesn't mean we should be walking around here miserable. It doesn't mean we should be over here like, I think back to early postpartum. I definitely would be like in the corner crying with just all kind of guilt, right? And then I look up one day, I was like, girl, what? Like, you ever see Issa Rae, she's in the mirror talking stuff? Like, girl, like, I look up one day, I was like, I'm not doing this. Like I cannot, I will not, I shall not, right? And then that's what prompted me to kind of go into coaches. I'm like, you know what? We have the power to make changes, but I think it starts with, you know, like I said, maybe you've seen this as a child. Again, please get off the internet sometimes, y'all. Like respectfully, what you see on the internet, like all these little Pinterest photos, all kinds of stuff. Y'all know it's not real, right? Because they got a maid in the background and nanny you can't see off camera. If the house is clean, don't trust it. Okay. So even that, it's important to have, sometimes a village is also your online community. And that's great, right? But don't compare yourself and don't, veer off and try to do things that don't work for you. So I'm just curious again, if anyone has any questions in the chat or wants to comment. Somebody said, speaking of changing cultural norms, are there doulas who support? Oh, thank you for saying that. I was going to mention that in a second. Are there doulas who support single moms? And I'd love to also take a moment to shout out to single moms who are doing it because again, you are the default parent, you are the parent. So you don't have the luxury of, I understand that I have a partner and that's a luxury, right? So if you take a moment to talk about that, or if you have any thoughts,
But yeah,
Dr.
no, and I
Saida.
think you're saying single mom by choice, like people who, initiate pregnancy on their own with knowing that they don't have a partner in tow. And so, yeah, absolutely. And I think that that also speaks to like doulas that really specialize around like fertility support. I mean, every time, every type of scenario that a person could be in that's pregnant or in the reproductive journey, you could find a doula that would be willing to support. Now, whether or not they're a specialist in it is going to be based on how many people that they've experienced with it, but the willingness of that person to support, to learn, to do the research is also going to be equally as important. There are a lot of transferable skills. So you don't need to, they're not doing surgery, right? You don't need to find somebody that has all of the specific specializations per se, but it can be helpful that they have familiarity, especially if it's a unique situation. And that also brings up to, doulas that specialize in working with LGBT families as well, because that can be a unique journey. And on the cultural side of that, like on the lived experience side of that, there are a lot of nuances with the nature of same-sex relationships that are different than that male-female dynamic. So we were talking about a lot of gender role expectations between males and females, and that's a lot more fluid with queer couples. So there's a lot of things that you don't have to unlearn, as a partner. If you're used to like the male female dynamic, they may not be expecting to be as engaged, or, they may not have had messaging around certain types of nurturing, where if they're both female couples, they would have maybe both been given a lot of messaging around that in their families. And so they're coming with sometimes different levels of information. And also too, people end up choosing to be the birthing parent, even though they weren't really necessarily like in that, like, I want to be a mother and I want to be a nurturer person, but I'm the one with the womb. I'm the one with better fertility between the two of us. So I'll carry the child, but actually she's going to be the mother. She's going to be more engaged in that way. And so there's a lot of different versions of what family looks like outside of a binary with males and females. And so it's helpful to have doulas that are aware of that and, and can address those as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And the questions are rolling in, they're getting good. So we're going to switch to, I'm looking at this question right here about advice for first-time moms during the first trimester. I have some thoughts, but I want to just pass the ball to you and just let you take that one from a doula perspective.
There's a lot of advice and it's so overwhelming.
It's
Oh,
a
I feel
lot.
you,
It's a
Morgan.
lot.
People just, and
It's a
then don't
lot.
put on TikTok. There's like a new version of every kind of information
Get
that's
up, get
contradictory.
off the internet. Get off the
Yeah, it's
internet for
really
advice.
get a doula and rather than go on Google. Because at least the
No,
doula is a
honestly,
lived
yes.
experience. They're working with people. They actually have some practical, and obviously
That's
working
it.
with midwives and OBs and providers, but let's see, advice to first time moms in the first trimester. So each trimester does have its own kind of vibe. In my experience, physically and in observation, first trimester tends to be a more exhausted time. Like your body is like, and I always think because in the first trimester, you think like anciently, you may not, I mean, people watch their periods more back then than they do probably now, because people were more watching for cycles. But you may not have had a pregnancy test to know that you're pregnant, right? So the body wants to indicate to you very quickly, you are pregnant. Stop doing the most. Lay down. Feed me, right? Like you'll have interesting cravings. There'll be some nausea a lot of times in the first trimester. And I always thought it was super helpful when, I don't know if it was a midwife or my doula who told me when I was first pregnant that the nausea is actually because a chemical, what happens when my body basically gets hungry is that there's a rise in chemicals that my body responds to with nausea. And so if I just if I didn't allow myself to get hungry, I wouldn't get nauseous or I wouldn't be as nauseous. So morning sickness is not about the morning time. It's about you haven't eaten for 8 hours. And so I was like, oh, don't give me information. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have some grapes. Back then I ate nuts. Now I realize that wasn't actually good for me. Look, I have some reactions, but I'm gonna have some grapes. I can have some crackers, whatever kind of small snacks, not like have a bunch of meals as an excuse to just keep eating all day long, but knowing that if I didn't allow myself to get too hungry. Now, if you think about that, that means you have to be mindful. You have to start caring for yourself. You have to, I had very active jobs. I was driving, I was doing in-home therapy at the time. So I was driving all around South Central Los Angeles to people's home, to projects, to the hospital. I didn't really incorporate food into my life. I was 20 something. So, it was like, oh, whatever, I'll eat when I get hungry. And sometimes my hunger, I realized I was starving by 5 o'clock, right? I was in a very bad habit of self-care around that time. I would be uncomfortable for hours, but whatever, I'm 24, right? So, but the body, when you're pregnant, needs a lot more mindfulness. And so I think that's my advice is see all the changes as an indication that you need to make some shifts in the way that you care for yourself and put things in place so that you can have more space for yourself, get those naps in and like insist. I mean, it didn't look clean for me. I was sleeping in Walmart most of the time because I was driving in the day. So I go to someone's house, do therapy. If I had an hour break, I was like, where's the Target or the Walmart? I was parked right up under the light and
car naps.
And go, and I'm telling you, my car became my life for for like 10 years. I was doing a lot in my car, but that was the nature of the kind of job that I had. And that's where I could find my rest, but I found it though, versus just kind of pushing through. You don't want to push through in the first trimester. First trimester is also a vulnerable time for the body regarding the baby. The average person, the largest number of losses will happen in the first trimester, which is partially a natural phenomenon because the body intelligently chooses to mostly keep pregnancies that are viable. So if there's any genetic issues, if there's something you wouldn't even be able to detect, the body usually allows the body to release something that doesn't seem viable to the body. And that's a lot of, early miscarriages are just our evolutionary process's natural way of filtering out what is most viable. But then you also have, if you're too stressed, if you're doing too much, if you're carrying too much, then you could also put your body into a stress where it's like, not able to really hold and nurture what it's trying to do, which could also put you into a vulnerable situation. So rest and get some friends that have had a kid, I would say in the past 3 years, to give you practical, local resources and advice, because they're going to know a little bit about what's coming for you in your area, who are the great people to connect to, and maybe some other groups that you could do while you're pregnant.
That's wonderful advice. And I'm just going to add 2 cents. And what you said, just from a coaching perspective, that I would encourage my clients to do, and you say like the mindfulness piece, listen to your body, but also lean into that season. Like you said, if your body is telling you to slow down and rest, you need to do that. Progesterone, the hormone that's causing the extra reflex. Somebody said it's like plants, okay, I'm reading that in a second. But like when your body's signaling if you do something, like you said, do it. I definitely took car naps. I took car naps for that first pregnancy, especially. I was like, I'm so sleepy. I would just take naps at work all the time. So the thing about it is your body knows what it needs before you consciously are aware. And so lean into it. And sometimes with the first trimester, that means going to your calendar, looking at what's on it. It could be penciling in those naps, nap break. Okay. It could be setting alarms on your phone to make sure that you're eating. And when you eat every 2 to 3 hours, it does help for those of you who are experiencing nausea. But even nausea aside, just energy level, you will feel better. Nobody said to eat fast food 7 times a day. It just means to have small meals and snacks throughout the day. The nausea will be way more subsided unless you have another medical consideration, a whole different story. But just general morning sickness. But the point is, first trimester is a great teaching point, honestly, for motherhood, because in real life, when the baby comes, okay, your world is just whatever you had planned, throw it away and try again because there's going to be a whole baby. And I feel like the first trimester is kind of a wake up call mentally and emotionally and spiritually of like, hey, just so you know, you no longer run the show. So do you want to get with the program and try to figure this out or what? So encouraging you, especially a first time mom, the first time is overwhelming. You don't know what's going on, but your body does. Your body knows what it needs. Your body is telling you what to do. Make the adjustments, listen. And I agree. Find a friend, but also make sure you get advice from people who are like-minded, people who you would want to raise your own child. Like all your family and friends, some of them take the advice and throw it away. Don't ask them. Okay. If they're not someone that you would really want to be hands-on with your child, everyone's parenting style and values are different. So if you have someone who, you want to do things similar to what they're doing, great. If you can have a best friend who parents different from you is the point I'm making. So just, again, your gut knows what to do, your body knows what to do. Do what feels right. But yeah, stay off TikTok, stay off the blogs, searching for stuff. Just also first time moms, none of us know what we're doing. I know, but if they do, they're lying, okay? Because none of us none of us know. You're not supposed to know. This is your time to learn. So understand you're gonna figure it out. Don't overthink it. We have another question though that's really great. So I want to make sure we have time because we're down to the last few minutes, and I want to use it to kind of wrap up here. But I want to read this first. It's like plants. You don't expect fruit if they are too stressed by drought, lack of food, water, and heat. Correct. You literally have a seed in your womb that is sitting there trying to thrive. You got to take care of it and yourself. Um, this question was pretty loaded. How can educational models address systemic racism with classes pertaining to repro justice and maternal mortality? So systems, we're talking about systems and maternal health outcomes here. And again, this is a loaded question and we only have like 5 minutes left here, but you want to take this one? Because I'm
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
okay.
Models, as in maybe like an education system. I mean, I think
So
one,
it says, yeah, it says educational models
yeah.
specifically here. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking like educational models, meaning like universities or like a whole model. I mean, in general, I mean, there certainly are a lot of systemic racism, like courses and trainings, but I think what would be more ideal systemically to mitigate reproductive injustices, maternal mortality, all of it, is to also start educating much earlier than we do for people who are going to be in the birthing and reproductive world. So our teens, younger, like people having real awareness of what is like healthy and normal in the body, really maximizing nutrition in the perinatal population early, so that people aren't coming into their maternal experience with disparity in their nutrition, because that's actually a lot of things that also play a role in how vital people's pregnancies are, how well, whether or not they have like iron deficiency and they end up having a hemorrhage and things like that. All the cardiovascular stuff, stress reduction. So, if you actually like implemented like mindfulness and yoga and like meditative practices in the birthing population, just this age group who could reproduce needs to have coaching and support and education around stress reduction. That would change the game as well, because a lot of the experiences, including racism, causes stress. So people need opportunities and tools to mitigate stress. And that is something that we often are thinking of like this whole giant systemic,
Yeah.
solution. But really, when you come down to it, our peers in the Latinx community, they actually do better in maternal mortality in a lot of aspects. And they have very similar social determinants, very similar scenarios that we do in society. But what's different is that the infrastructure around supporting the pregnant and postpartum mother, particularly around the Mexican population. I live in California, so that's been very, and in Texas and areas where we have a large Mexican population, a lot of research has been done with that population in particular. There's such a cultural encapsulation around the pregnant and postpartum person that it mitigates a lot of things that societally are not available, even though there's other disparities like poverty and various aspects. So we do have the opportunity in our communities to support each other in ways that can help mitigate the issues. And I think, focusing on stress reduction probably would give a better bang for our buck in the community than a lot of information about maternal mortality and sort of like scary topics that are better for politicians and providers to understand, but less for the people, I would say.
I love that. Thank you. And you always just jump right in and just cover everything straight through. So thank you. And we are wrapping up, so I don't want to rush off. I want to just kind of summarize a few things as we wrap up here, and then have time to close out. A couple of things that came to mind as you were talking. We talked several times about support today, and I think it's so important that we reiterate that, like you were talking about. Can you guys still hear me? I think okay. Talk about support. So you're talking about how in the Latinx community, and I'm from Los Angeles as well. So you're talking about this specifically, like the Hispanic, Mexican community. Those outcomes are different because there's a different level of support. And again, culturally, in different cultures, even in Asian communities as well, the support is very different.
African community, Caribbean community.
Different communities.
If you're not American and you have a traditional society, you're going to probably treat the pregnant postpartum, person better than people do in America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was going to say, a couple of things wrapping up, like support is really important. This idea that I'm having a baby, I had a baby, now it's on me. Stop doing that. We need support. We deserve it. We need it. Utilize it, create it, create that village. If you don't have one, like I said, it could be online. My doula was online for my birth because of COVID anyway, but whether it's in person, online, family, friends, partners, it could be a lot of different people that are in your village. If you don't have a village, please create one. We need a village. We are not meant to do it alone. I think the questions earlier about, men getting involved, or just like you said, just partners getting involved, it doesn't matter, like gender wise, like in this case, birth, pregnancy, postpartum are not just for us. They are, in fact, a communal process, and we need and deserve that support. So create that village. Also, like what you mentioned about, again, doulas essentially are like the coaches when you're talking about birth, pregnancy, postpartum, and there's different phases that come with that, right? But it is important, I think, that we all have, you mentioned too, like taking time for, feeling our bodies, which is that's like my love language, feeling your bodies, moving. The preventive measures are ultimately what also help with the outcomes. And even though, yes, we are talking about a lot of stats, when we're talking about mortality outcomes, and yes, things are happening in the hospital systems that we can't control. When you take care of yourself, when you're healthy, when you're managing your blood pressure, and you have a doula, like one thing about my own pregnancies, when I went in, I wasn't high risk because I was active, I was taking care of myself, and I had a doula. I had all those, everything I could possibly control to pour into myself, I did it. And so I'm encouraging you guys to do the same, stay active, find the pregnancy and postpartum classes, find your tribe, find your village, stay connected, figure out what questions to ask when you're going in to see providers, whether it's pregnancy, postpartum. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't let anybody rush you out the room. Do what needs to be done to ask and get those answers. And last but not least, your body knows what it needs. That's mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So during pregnancy, postpartum, and motherhood as a whole, parenthood as a whole, for those of us who are, partners and parents on here as well. We may not literally know what's happening because we're trying to figure it out. We're all winging it. Okay. I say all the time, I feel like I'm like in the dryer bouncing around, and every day I'm like, I'm going to figure out how we're going to get to every day. It's like, you good? I'm bouncing around, but it'll make sense in a second.
Right, right.
And that's life, that's motherhood, that's parenthood, right? But we know more than we think when we live intuitively.
Yes.
And we
Intuition is
keep,
huge. Just
yeah,
really listen to yourself. And if you don't have a habit, like if you say, well, I don't know, I'm not really connected to my intuition. This is the time to get
sit
connected.
down.
You're gonna need
It's
all
time to
the
go
skills.
lay down.
Yeah,
Go
you're gonna need
lay
all those
down.
skills from here
It's
on in if you're starting this parenting journey. And then I just want to say too,
it's time to slow down.
if you have providers that for some reason you don't feel comfortable with,
Get a new
work
one.
to find a new person. Don't ever stay with anyone that you feel like, I just don't know if they really hurt. Because if they didn't hear you in the prenatal visit, when you're in labor, I mean, probably they're not a listener.
Go.
They're not, yeah. You don't want to be when you're really going to rely on them to be advocating for you with the staff and with your scenario and for your birth plan. And you want to be in alignment with the people who are going to be on your team and make that very important to you. Because when I do hear the cases around maternal mortality, I always cringe when I hear them say, you know, they weren't listening to us. And of course, like, this is like, we have been conditioned so much as women, as Black people, to just be thankful we have somebody that's going to help. And we don't always have options. We don't have insurance options, right? You don't have financially, like, this is the only hospital, that was the one doctor, and that was the only time, you know. So, but when there's an opportunity and when you can find a way to make choices to change from people that you don't feel comfortable with, even though it's going to be like, you feel like, I'm so tired, I don't feel like doing this, it will be worth it in the end, because this is going to be you and them when you're giving birth. And, you know, you're going to be laying there, you know, with very little resource other than breathing and, you know, and relaxing. You need people who really will support and advocate for you and be invested in the experience that you're wanting to have.
Absolutely. And thank you for reiterating that. Your providers work for you. I'm going to hear it today. First time mom, first trimester, your providers work for you. Your doulas are there for you. So, you know, it's all about you. So if you don't like something, someone said, right, find a provider. I've been there, done that. So definitely advocate for yourself, but make sure your team is on your team. We do have to wrap up. So I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for all your insight, all your wisdom, all your incredible advice. Thank you to everyone who logged on today. We're going to get ready to sign off. But again, my name is Christina Lumpkin, and we're going to send this playback also for those of you who didn't join. You'll get the playback. And thank you guys for joining. I'm on LinkedIn at Christina Lumpkin. I'm also on Instagram at Coach Mom Wife Life. So thank you guys. Did you want to say goodbye and kind of
it was lovely
sign off quickly?
Thank you for all the questions. You can find me at Dr. Saida Uplifts on IG and Facebook and LinkedIn as Dr. Saida Pepper Wilson.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone. Great weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.